started, I'd like to remind you our coming meeting on August 14th. That's the on-site meeting, and it's scheduled to be at Future Tech Enterprise in Holbrook, Long Island, and we'll be talking about artificial augmented reality, virtual reality, as well as 3D printing for manufacturing. So all these recent technologies that we'll be able to learn about, and they also have the devices there, technology there, so we can also try AR and VR technologies, and we can learn about it from the experts at Future Tech. So we are very excited about this event, and I encourage you to register because we have limited seating, and registration is almost closed. So looking forward to seeing you on August 14th. And today we'll be talking about government assistance affected by foreign trade. And with us today, our presenter is Teresa Stockton from Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. She is with us today, and she put together a great presentation full of information, very educational for manufacturers and many other companies, of course. So I like to leave it to Teresa, and let's learn about the government assistance available for companies. And also, please, as I mentioned earlier, please keep your microphones muted. We have a Q&A session at the end, so we'll address your questions in the Q&A session. You can type your questions in the chat box, so we can read there and we can address your questions. Teresa, are you ready?
I'm ready, Kevin. Thank you again for having me.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I wanted to thank Kevin for having me because we are a grant program that's been around for 40 years, but sadly, most people don't even know that we exist. So I rely very heavily on networking with different groups because one of the many obstacles that I face with this position is that if I were to try to call manufacturers direct, there's so many things out there now that people are trying to take advantage of companies that most people, if I tried calling direct, would never pick up the phone or return my call, because why would a federal grant program be reaching out to me? So to start this, Kevin, you can keep clicking through this so that all the verbiage comes up. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about the TAAC or TAAF program, the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Firms program. We're going to talk about who is eligible for this program, the types of assistance that you actually receive if you apply and are approved for this program, and how you get started. Next, please. So the TAAC program, TAAF, is actually through the Department of Commerce and then through the EDA. The mission of our program is to help import-impacted U.S. manufacturing and service firms develop, implement projects to regain global competitiveness, expand markets, and so on and so forth. And basically what we were, brought about was to actually, combat foreign competition during the years of when NAFTA started. Next, please. Our program, by the way, is actually, it goes through Department of Commerce. The EDA is the one that actually approves our petitions, but the Research Foundation of SUNY actually administers the grant program, and I'll explain why that is an advantage when we get to that point in the program. So who is eligible for our program? So what you have is, this is designed for manufacturing or service companies. Now, service companies came about in like the last 15 years or so. It was only focused on manufacturing, but service companies came about when, if you think of like call centers and things of that nature that were getting, hit hard by foreign competition. So they did add service companies in, but really more with manufacturers. They've had to have been in business at least 2 years. They've had to have a decline in sales or production of at least 5%, and they had to have a decline in employment of at least 5%. So it's got to be both. It's got to be sales or production, but it always has to be employment. And that decline has to be due in part to 5% due to foreign competition. So you'll see our magic number for this grant program is 5%. And we'll get into a little bit more details as I go on, but if you just remember 5%. And so I like to give an example of a company that would, fit this profile. So say, for example, you're a manufacturer that you did $2 million in business last year, and you did $1 million in business this year. You had 10 employees, you lost one, you went down to 9. So you obviously hit the 5% levels in sales and employment. Now, of your loss, of that $1 million loss I had talked about going from 2 million to 1 million, only 5% of that loss has to be attributable to foreign competition to be able to be eligible for this grant. So our thresholds are extremely low and easy to hit. You can go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the information required, because one of the things about grant programs that you hear about is that a lot of times they're very cumbersome. So people hear federal grant and immediately their mindset goes to, ugh, I'll never qualify. It's too much paperwork. I don't have a grant writer on staff. Our grant process is extremely simple and streamlined. From your perspective, it should not take you more than a few hours to gather the data to send to me. And our program does everything for you. For this grant, we actually write the whole thing for you. So only data is what we need. And a lot of times people can get this data to me in a very quick turnaround time, and I'll explain some of the data of what we need. Is that what we're really looking for is your sales and employment information. So what we do is we look at your profit and loss statements to try to determine that 5% loss. And we also look at your employment information. So if you're a New York State company, we're going to look at your New York State 45s, and that's where we pull all the information from to determine those 5% losses. Then we're going to ask for like a little brief history from your firm, which usually you can pull that right off the internet, your website. We'll ask for like DUNS numbers, NICS codes, your HTS codes, who's your market, who owns the company. Very simplistic information that we ask that shouldn't take you a long time to gather. And then another thing that we need is we need customer information. And this is how we prove foreign competition. So when we look at your profit and losses and see those losses, we don't know why you had those losses. Those are just numbers. So how we determine it and how we prove it is we ask to speak to a couple of your customers with your permission and after you have already spoken to them. And here's the questions that I would simply ask your customers to determine if you've been impacted by foreign competition. Are you currently working with company XYZ, and what are you purchasing from them? Have you gotten a quote for a like or similar product outside of the country? Have you then purchased this product outside of the country? And what is the country of origin? So that will be all I would ask your customers. Nothing proprietary, nothing that gives anything away. It just very vague information to prove foreign competition. And again, we ask that you speak to them prior to us talking to them. And usually your sales people or the owners of the company who work closely with the customers know why you've lost some of these customers. And those are the customers that we'll talk to. If they said, we're currently coming to you, but now we're going somewhere else because it's much cheaper to buy the same product outside of the country. I put a very positive spin on this when I speak to your customers too, by the way. I'm not calling and saying, oh, they're struggling. It's, they're going through a difficult time. How we position this is I'm working with company XYZ and I'm calling on their behalf because they're trying to apply for a federal award to become more globally competitive. So it's a very positive experience. And usually I hear all very positive responses from your customers in the fact that they don't want to leave you and they would like to stay with you, and they'll do everything in their power to come back to you if your prices can become, competitive again. And hopefully our grant can help you do that. So what types of assistance, excuse me, can be used for this grant? So one of the first things is everybody wants capital equipment usually. And when I tell them that it can only be used for knowledge-based services, I get a lot of long faces. People are disappointed because they want that big piece of capital equipment or any kind of equipment. But One of the things that I say is once they say that they wanted that piece of equipment, I tell them, if you buy a new piece of equipment, you may need new software to go with that equipment, Epicor, Job Boss, ERP systems. You may need new training or some training to go with that equipment. You might need new marketing because now you have more capabilities with this piece of equipment. You may need new ISO certifications because you have this new piece of equipment. So everybody's like, yeah, they don't think of that. They just think of that equipment. Our grant pays for all the ancillary types of services that may come along with a large equipment purchase. So here are some of the different types of, if you want to go back to that last one. So we have management. So any kind of examples of management might be, strategic planning, succession planning, executive recruitment. Marketing obviously explains itself, but marketing can be anything from strategic management planning, marketing development, market studies, advertising and, merchandising strategies, brand identity development. Financing can be any kind of budgeting or forecasting, cost accounting. Information technology can be any kind of like software evaluations and recommendations, any kind of specific manufacturing types of software, like I said, Job Boss, Epicor, those types of ERP systems and things of that nature. You can use it for web design. That's always a big hot one for us. Any kind of manufacturing and engineering and any kind of ISO certifications or markings. So those are some of the top marketing or top knowledge-based services that it can be used for. And that's not an exclusive list. You can add to that as long as it's knowledge-based. It cannot be used for any of your internal employee salaries or benefits. Okay, next. So now, what is this grant? So what do you get with this grant once how does it work? So once we go through the pre-qualification worksheet and we see that you qualify and you get approved for the grant, you have two options for the grant. The first option, and it's next, Kevin, would be a 25 to 75% cost share option. And what this means, and I'm going to call myself, I jokingly call myself the golden unicorn of grant programs because we have a lot of advantages that most other grants don't. So the first one is 25 to 75%. What that means is out of any $30,000 project that you choose to do, we will cover 75% of all costs of the grant. Kevin, you can keep clicking through. So out of $30,000, we will pay the vendor of your choosing $22,500. You will pay 25% or $7,500. So what's some of the advantages that I'm going to be repetitive about throughout this talk today is, number one, we are a disbursement grant, and I challenge most everybody to tell me how many disbursement grants you're aware of. Most of them are reimbursement. So you have to come up with all the money, hit hard milestones, and then get reimbursed. Ours is dispersed, meaning that once you get approved and you find a $30,000 project, we are going to pay your vendor directly 75%. So you don't have to come up with anything but your share of, and that would only be $7,500 or 25% of a $30,000 project. And the nice thing about this is that while we want you to grow your business to become globally competitive and, get more sales and maintain or increase your employee base, there's no clawbacks on this grant. So that's huge. That's another big, advantage of our grant. And I'll talk about a few more advantages as we move along. Okay, the next one. The next level of funding you could have is 50% cost share option. And that's where you can spend a maximum of $150,000. We would pay 50%, so our disbursement rate drops to 50 instead of 75, and you would pay 50%. So on a $150,000 project, it's now going to cost you $75,000, and so you'll pay half of it. Another big advantage is to our grant program that most other ones don't have this option. We do not care where you get your grant share portion from. So you could use other grants to help pay for your 50%. So that's always, it's a very nice aspect of it. So what happens and how we start this whole process? is number one, we're going to pre-qualify you. And what I'll do is if anybody wants to reach out to me, we'll have a quick discussion and I'll send you a pre-qualification worksheet. In this pre-qualification worksheet, we're going to be looking for those 5% sales losses. And so really what this pre-qualification worksheet is it's just a little simple Excel spreadsheet. And what you'll do is you'll fill it out. And everything we do is current year to date. So if I sent you an Excel spreadsheet today, it would be from July 2018 to June 2019, and then that same time frame the year before. And what we're looking at is 5% losses in sales and employees within the same time frame. Now, if you can't show those 5% losses, then what we can do is we can look at interim amounts. So we can do a 6-month snapshot, current year to date this year versus that same time frame last year, all the way up to 11 months. Because what happens is sometimes one bad month can send you over the edge. If that doesn't work, we can go back 24 months, not including current year, or we can go back 36 months, not including current year. So we can go all the way back to 2015 numbers and try to see if you can qualify based on a look-back period. So sometimes people are doing better than they were last year, but you weren't where you were 4 years ago. So I don't want to overwhelm you with all the different ways that we could qualify you, but let's put it this way. Our grant is more inclusive than exclusive. So we work very, very diligently to try to get you qualified. And there's many, many other ways. And I'll just briefly touch that we can do the look back, we can do interim, we can look at production instead of sales. We can look at if you're, a sole proprietor and you have 1099, so independent contractors, you hire seasonal people, we can look at those kind of numbers. So there's many ways. And I always tell people, don't disqualify yourself. Talk to me and we'll see what we can do to try to see if you'd be a fit for this program, because there's many different ways. So once we determine that you have pre-qualified, you can go to the next slide. And then the next slide after that. So the first one with the pre-qualification, that shouldn't take you more than a couple hours at the most. I've had people do it in 15 minutes to get me the information for the pre-qualification worksheet. Once I receive that from you, I immediately look at it. It's all calculated right on the sheet. I'll turn around and say, okay, you qualified within this time frame. So the next step is your eligibility certification. And this is where we saw that you qualified, you hit those 5% losses. So what we're going to do is now I'm going to say, okay, you sent me these numbers. Now I need the documentation to support those numbers. I'm going to need those profit and loss statements, copies of them, of your New York State 45s. And this is all business confidential. Nobody ever sees any of this other than the people who are reviewing your petition to qualify you. I do the whole petition for you, other than you have to, like I said, give me this information. Once it's done, then I send it to the EDA and they determine if you will be eligible. Our success rate is about 100%. And the reason why it's so high is that we send companies in that we have vetted them out pretty gosh darn good. We know that, when we're sending it in, that you should get approved, because we make sure we go through all those numbers and things of that nature. There's no cost to apply to this program, and it takes the second step usually takes, a couple hours for you to give me the information. I could put together the petition in a few days, as long as your information is clean and concise, and it's somewhat of a simple company. And then I send the petition in, and then the EDA has 6 to 8 weeks to review your petition and approve it. Okay, the next slide, please. So the next slide is now your petition has come back to us, and we see that you have been approved. So this next step is called the development of an adjustment proposal. And really what this is, it's a business plan as to what your plans are to become more globally competitive. What is it that you want to do with this money? And that's really what this is. It's sort of a formality. So what we do is we come on site and we do like a very mini diagnostic review of your company, and then you are going to choose what level of funding you want to choose. So whether your company makes $1,000 a year or your company makes $10 million a year, we do not dictate to you what level of funding that you choose. You choose that. That's completely up to you. Usually if you're going to pick the 30,000 or less, you're really only going to work on one or maybe two projects. If you're going to do the 150, it's multiple projects. So what we do is we get very little additional information because we have most of it from the petition, but we will ask you for a little bit more information, and we'll put this adjustment proposal together, and then it goes back to the EDA for additional approval. Now, you won't get rejected at this point unless, you were to do something so crazy that they said, no, we're not going to allow you to spend the funds for this. But again, usually when we send these, we know what's acceptable and what's not. So there's usually no, this is just a formality. So once this goes down, they have a couple weeks to review this, and then they, send it back. Now there is a tiny small amount there is a cost now to you for this, but you've already been approved into the program. But it's very, very minimal, and it's based on each individual company. So I can't ever say, oh, it's this or that, but let's put it this way. It's a very minimal amount. So then the next step 4, is once everything has been approved, now we go to project implementation. So this is now, you're going to select a firm, and again, this is completely up to you who you want to use as your consultant to do this work for you. We can make recommendations, but usually people come to us with who they want to work for. And then what's going to happen is we, the TAAC, will sign a contract with you, the grant recipient, and then we'll also sign a contract with the vendor of your choosing. And then what happens is your vendor then will send out 2 bills on however you guys decide, whether it's quarterly, monthly, or whatever. They're going to send a bill to you. You pay your share of either 25 or 50%, depending on what level you choose, and then we pay our share. Now, because this is, I had mentioned that this grant is actually administered through the research of Foundation of SUNY, your vendor will get paid very timely, because a lot of times with federal grants, it takes forever to get paid. We actually pay out within, as soon as we get that bill and you pay your share, we pay it within a few days. They've received their funds. So that's a big positive. So people like that a lot. Now, one of the things that a lot of times gets brought up is the timeline for this whole process. Because of course we all want everything yesterday. Everybody wants funds immediately. And in the world of grants, that just doesn't happen. So what I tell people is, if you are applying for this grant, I mean, there's no guarantee you're going to get this money. I mean, who's to say that they're going to say no, that, we're not going to accept this for whatever reason. But, like I say, usually we have a great success rate. But with that being said, know that it can be 90 to 120 days from start to finish when you get these funds. So if you have to start a project right now, but you'd like to utilize our funds, phase the project. So talk to your consultant and say, I've applied for a grant. I may be getting this funding. Can we phase it so that you start the project? We can't pay for it because it's it's already in process or it's been completed. We can't pay for anything retroactive. Phase 2 is in process. We can't pay for it because the fund, you haven't been approved yet. But phase 3, you've been approved and you're ready to go. We can then start on phase 3, 4, and 5, and we can pay for that. Or buy the Kia, knowing that possibly if this grant money comes in, you'll have the funds to buy the Cadillac. So I try to overcome the objection of, oh, it might take too long, is that if the funds come, then, utilize them, when they get there for either a larger project or a later phase of the project. Now, one of the things, too, is you have 5 years to spend this money, too. So if the current project doesn't work, but you think of another project that you might want to do next year or the year after, then utilize the funds there. Okay, next, I'm going to talk about, the advantages, which I've touched on most of these, but just to reiterate why we are, a great grant program to apply for, is it's a very simple and easy process for the grant applicant. Again, you don't need a grant writer. It's just a matter of data collection. You send it to me. I do everything for you. It is a disbursement grant, like I mentioned, not reimbursement. And one of the positives for that is I had mentioned that you don't have to come up with all the money and then worry about getting reimbursed, because there's no clawbacks or things of that nature. But also, you have no tax liability with this grant because the money goes directly to the vendor. So the money never passes through you, so you have no tax liability, which again is a very, that's a significant factor. Also, I had just mentioned you have 5 years to spend this grant funding. So, if something happens where you decide that you don't have time or you don't have the money to spend at this point, you have 5 years to spend it. And the grant funding can be used for multiple projects. Another, aspect that people like about this is that they, can spread out the funds as much as they want. And they like the fact that really it's like getting a knowledge-based service for 50 to 75% off. So that's really, one of the major, advantages of this grant. Again, I mentioned there's no clawbacks on this grant as well. So again, while we want you to be, proactive and we want you to be, successful in your business, if you don't, it takes away that stress of, oh my gosh, I didn't create so many jobs or I didn't, increase my sales that I'm not going to get reimbursed. Okay, next, Kevin. That, the no penalties goes along with, there's no clawback. So if you don't spend any of the grant, like say, which has never happened, but, we get some people who apply for this grant and then they, they don't spend all the money or they spend some of it. There's no penalties at all associated with this grant funding as well. So that's another positive. And that's really it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. I know I throw a lot out at you, and after this presentation, I can send Kevin an example of what we look at for pre-qualifying for this grant. I can send you a pre-qualification worksheet, and you can take a look at it. I'll send the instructions along with a brochure, one of our brochures, and frequently asked questions, so that you'll have all that information to review on your own time too. Great.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I appreciate it. Very, very educational, very informative for manufacturers of Long Island. That's for sure. And let's see if we have any questions in our chat box, in the private box, or the or my personal box. I'm checking if there's any questions. In terms of the applications, most of the applications come from New York or New Jersey in general.
Where do they come from?
Yes.
We just took over New Jersey just recently. We only just had New York for many, many years, and they sort of realigned our territories. We get probably 90% from New York, 10% from New Jersey, and we haven't had any luck with Puerto Rico as of right yet.
One of the questions that I see is, we've been talking about foreign competition. Does it matter where the foreign competition is from? Is there any relation?
Nope, that's a good question. When I first started this program, I remember I used to say overseas competition, but that's not true because Canada and Mexico are not overseas and they're competition. So any country that is outside of the United States is fair game to be considered foreign competition.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely good to know. And I definitely like the fact that that's a disbursement grant. So I think that's a great advantage for manufacturers while applying. So one of the questions is, I think I'm gonna let me see. Yeah, where can I use the funding that I get from the Trade Adjustment Center? Is there any limitations, any restrictions to use the fund?
It's like I said, it's just got to be used for knowledge-based services. So if you can touch it, we can't purchase it. So I use the example, if people want to do a new marketing campaign and they need new logos and new brochures and new website, we can cover everything but the printing of the brochures per se. We can cover the design of them. We can't cover the printing of it. So, you know, we've had people use it for, you know, all types of marketing. I have a woman that does decorative glass, and she hired digital influencers, and, you know, that was part of her marketing campaign. We just worked with a company who's a pool company, and he needed help, and we hired a, like a call center to help him get some, you know, business leads, things of that nature. The big ones for us tend to be marketing, ERP software systems, manufacturing software systems, and ISO certifications tend to be the top ones that people utilize.
Yes, yeah, which is much needed for any manufacturer. That's for sure. I think that's an important assistance. Well, also, I'd like to remind our attendees that I also add our contact information, especially Teresa's contact information, phone number, and email addresses on the screen. So if you like to keep the conversation going, if you have further questions, you know, feel free to contact Teresa. The phone number and the email address is on the screen, so that is that's available for you. If I have any other questions, let me see. I don't have any other questions from the attendees. Yeah, I think we are all set in terms of questions. Anything else that you'd like to add before we end our webinar, Teresa?
No. Other than thank you so much. I hope to hear from some of you. You know, whether it's if you know companies or you can refer companies, that's always a tremendous help to me. But also, Kevin, as I mentioned, after this presentation, I'll send you it's a brochure that talks about what I just spoke about, and it also some frequently asked questions, and then I'll send you a separate email that shows the pre-qualification process. So if any of the companies would be interested in you know, even applying, you know, please feel free to reach out to me, because that is my passion, is truly helping, you know, these companies that truly need this help. And I don't want anybody to be overwhelmed or think it's difficult, because it really isn't. I try to do as much as possible, and I will actually hop in the car if you need me to and drive down and work right with you if it's something that, you know, people feel that might be overwhelming or they don't have time to do, because my goal is to help as many companies as we can.
Teresa, thank you so much. Your determination is quite admirable. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And yes, and yeah, definitely, please share the additional information with me. I'll share it with our attendees, and I'll also share it with our manufacturing committee of HIA-LI, with our members and our followers, definitely. So that is important that we put the word out so they can definitely benefit from these government assistance. That's very, very important. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I'd like to also thank our attendees for their time and interest. And I look forward to seeing you all on August 14 on our coming meeting at Future Tech in Holbrook, Long Island. We'll be talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, and 3D printing, and you'll have a chance to try these nice and shiny technologies. 3D printing you like to see, you can see in action, and you can try VR and AR. Especially, we like to talk about using these new technologies in manufacturing, how we can position them, how we can use them, how we can benefit them in this competitive marketplace. So that's going to be a great event. We have a lot of registrations already, and we have limited seating. Please take a moment to register for our coming on-site meeting. And looking forward to seeing you in our coming webinars as well. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you.